thank you so much for joining us. I'm super honored today to be sitting here with Hope Cochran from Madrona. And we're in the Riveter, which is a special place for both of us because Hope is on the Riveter's board and has been a great advocate for helping the Riveter continue to grow. And as you guys know, the Riveter is our very, very lovely home. So I'm so honored that you're here with us today, and I'd love if we could start with your background because it's super interesting and somewhat surprising.
All right, well, thank you so much for having me here, and I love the fact that you're doing this. And of course, in the Riveter is even better. So, when I think back to my background, I have to go back to the fact that I majored in music and economics. I went to school definitely intending to major in business economics and ended up majoring in music along the way. As I reflect back on that, economics got me my interviews, but really when I think back to music and it was primarily performance, that is what I find that I actually use every day. So I still tell my children, major in economics because the interview getting is important.
Yes.
But as I think about that music background, so much discipline goes in with it. Having to manage your time, getting in the practice rooms continually. Practice makes perfect. Never be unprepared for whatever comes your way. I can't imagine getting on stage and not knowing every note of my music. As well as being able to handle unexpected things that are thrown at you. So, they always say the show must goes on. So when you're up there and something goes wrong and you just have to act like it's all fine and find a solution really, really quickly. I think of those skills in my career and I think of all the pivots and changes that I've had to address and things that I've had to learn and get prepared for. I really feel like it's those skills from my music major that have come to fruition in a very practical way.
That's amazing. I also think about some other themes that I've heard a lot this month about risk-taking and bravery. I mean, you were a particular kind of musician, is that right?
I was a singer, focused primarily on classical, so opera. And so I started my career in Deloitte & Touche as an auditor, and I would do my auditing by day and my opera by night.
Yes.
And I continued that for several years after school until I had my first child, and just found that working and going to performance at night wasn't quite the schedule that was working.
I can only imagine.
Right.
And in your classical career, were you a solo performer often?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Super interesting.
Really enjoyed, just getting up and practicing a creative side of me. So I feel like in business, I've always felt a little bit like I had this creative element that wasn't quite being used. And on the stage, I always felt like I had this very organizational element that wasn't being used. So I've always felt a little bit half in and half out of each world.
It's really interesting because I read a quote from you recently that said that you, in your professional career, have often been the only woman in the room.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you were the only person on the stage in many cases. Do you think that there's some relationship between your sort of ability to be that and be you and not...
Yeah, I think I've never shied away from being my own person, and I tend to not compare myself to others. We've often said my husband is incredibly competitive. He's a team sport competitive individual, and I've often said I'm not competitive, but what I really am is I'm competitive with myself. So I have a huge desire to do the best job I can do, and I think that comes down to that practice makes perfect. I want to utilize my skills in the fullest way. So I become very frustrated with myself if I don't think I did the best I could have done in that environment. And I think a lot of that has to do with performing on the stage.
That's super interesting because I hear the relationship with being the only woman in the room and sort of if you are just internally competitive, it's sort of not about who's around you, it's about your performance.
It is very much. I want to make sure, someone asked me the other day, what gives you joy? And I think what my natural instinctive response is what gives me joy is to be helpful. And I think if I'm using my skills to their fullest extent, I'm helping something, whether it be a company succeed, whether it be an individual, and that's something that I always want to bring into that room. So yes, I have more than often been the only woman in the room. And I don't know that I've really thought about it that much because I've been very secure in the skill set that I had to bring to the table and how I was helping the situation and furthering the situation forward. And so a lot of confidence in my own ability to bring something to fruition in that situation.
If you translate that into advice, would you say that there are certain things that you've done tactically? I mean, you've mentioned practice and preparation quite a bit, but if someone sort of doesn't have that same level of ability to be competitive with themselves or really think about how they can bring themselves best to the table, any advice about how to do that?
Yeah, I think a lot about career advancement and how do you get those opportunities. And I think that's one of the challenges for anyone, but I also think for women in the workplace. How do you find those opportunities, take advantage of them, get them? When I think back to my career and just a little bit of history, I was an accountant, started in Deloitte & Touche, but then quickly moved into industry. And I often tended to gravitate towards situations that were chaotic.
Interesting.
And, hopefully the positive spin on that is high growth.
Yep.
But the truth is chaos. And also being able to stomach a lot of risk.
Yep.
And I think when you go into those environments, there's just a lot to do.
Yes.
And the beauty in that is if you don't worry so much about, well, this is the job I took and I'm going to do this job, but you allow yourself to see all of the opportunities in the environment that you're in, you start picking up balls and doing lots of different things, the advancement comes quite quickly because you become needed and necessary. So as I think about the career advancement in my career, going from an accountant to then a CFO of a small company to a CFO of a big company, it often came with the fact that I was willing to just pick up balls, put myself out there, and show my skills in all unique ways.
And did you worry about the risk of failure considering the chaotic environment?
Risk of failure was something that was always there. I never felt like I knew if I was going to have a huge win or a huge disaster. And I think back to moments in my career. I started my own company. It had a successful outcome, and I can remember just emblazoned in my mind all the moments I thought I was going to fail and all the mistakes I made. And so yes, failure was always there, and you obsess about it a bit because you don't want to fail, or I didn't want to fail. And it was nice to be able to rely on my own ability just to run through any wall. And when you really have failure in your face, you figure out 5 different paths and you pursue them all, and you run hard. And so, as I think back to every company I've been in, I've had those moments where I've had to pursue a lot of different paths to try and avoid the failure.
That's super interesting. I mean, are there times like when you sort of you're running and you're worried? Are there things like do you go away and do something alone? Are there people in your life that help you kind of get over the mental hurdles? Or when the days are dark, what does Hope do?
When the days are dark.
Oh, your name is Hope. That's so perfect.
Right,
Hope.
right.
Of course you do.
When the days are dark, what do? I often actually just work harder. I hate to say that because taking a pause at that moment is more stressful.
Yeah.
But there are things I do to rejuvenate myself in moments where I'm not faced with the imminent domain, right?
Yes.
And that's, I get great joy from being a mother, being with my family. I also have my own passions that I pursue, and I think it's really important to keep that so that you can keep that perspective. But to your specific questions, which is those moments where you're like, oh my goodness, failure.
I'm trying to find this out for myself right now. I've gone off script.
Right. Taking a pause is actually not what calms me down at that moment. It's usually trying to pursue many paths. My big fault is I will pursue lots of different paths in that moment versus focus on one, because I'll want to have lots of options.
I mean, that could also be a positive. Because
I'll just deploy all resources in all different directions so we find the right wall to jump.
Super interesting. So switching gears a little bit, you're doing some really interesting work at Madrona through the Onboarding Women's program. Could you tell us a little bit about why you've chosen, with your incredibly busy schedule, to take on another thing and why it matters to you?
Yeah, so I love onboarding women. I continually obsess a bit about how we can change the diversity ratios in the workplace. They're at all levels in the workplace. They're at the mid-tier managers, the upper-tier managers, clearly in the executive ranks, and then once you get to the board, it's even worse, right? And we know those stats, we live them, we all deal with them every day. So how can we change this dynamic? And I'm always looking for really practical ways, and that's a whole topic of conversation. In regards to onboarding women specifically, the program is designed to find, and it's easy to find them, 25 to 35 amazingly talented women in our region, which is the Pacific Northwest. Give them the opportunity to, number one, come together with a community. Number two, learn what happens in a boardroom, learn the dynamics of a boardroom, get themselves ready for board interviews and board opportunities. And then once the program is at the end, to hopefully send them on their way and get them up on the corporate board ladder. So it's been a remarkable program. Again, not difficult to find amazing women. They are there, right? So supply is not the problem. It's, I would say, knowing that they are there and giving them the right platform to be known. So Madrona's been doing this for 2 years. We're in partnership with Deloitte & Touche, Perkins Coie, and Spencer Stewart.
Yeah.
And we run the program kind of through a 6-month period of time. We meet once a month with the same group of women, and then give them lots of resources and networking opportunities to help them find those board opportunities. We'd really like to change the shape of the corporate boardroom and allow those ratios of diversity to improve. Yep. And we all know that has to happen. I myself am on several public company boards. Some have been very intentional about increasing the diversity, and you can feel the difference in the room when you have, one of my boards, there's 5 women and 7 men. It is a great dynamic. And some of my other boards are the lone woman, right? And it's a different dynamic. It's important that we have a balanced conversation and a balanced environment in that. And that's where it starts. So at those companies where I'm on the board, I do a lot of speaking to the companies, and it is important that the women see that other women have made it all the way to the top. Yeah. It gives them encouragement. And so then we have to then go, okay, now how do we get it addressed on the executive ranks? How do we do it on the VP ranks? How do we do it on the director ranks? Yes. It needs to go all the way through.
And do you think that the problem is, like you mentioned, there's an education component, and then is there like a matching component, or you said you're giving them a platform? Like, what is the core problem here? Do you think that the women need more education about how to get onto the board, or do the companies not know they exist, or are the women not seeking out the opportunities? Yeah. Or probably some combination of all things?
It's probably a combination of all those things. I don't want to emphasize that the women need too much education, although I do think we're trying to accelerate the pipeline just a little bit. Yeah. But the women, of course, are fabulously skilled, and they have all the right business acumen. So we're just giving them a little bit of leg up in regards to getting ready for an interview that might come their way or something of that nature. I do think a lot of it comes down to how board searches are conducted. Mm-hmm. So a lot of board searches are conducted through networks of people already on the board.
Interesting.
And
that network issue.
Right, that just starts the whole topic. People tend to gravitate towards people that are like themselves. Yes. And so the candidates that get surfaced are often similar to the people that are already in the room. So there's that topic. There's also just the real practical issue of the fact that companies are born because they started from a private environment where they had private investors. So you look at the board was primarily composed of investors. Mm-hmm. Investors tend to be predominantly male, so it started that way. Yep. And then it's their network that they bring in as the company needs independent directors. So it starts from the very beginning. One of the things I love about Madrona's position in this situation is, of course, Madrona is in the business of funding young companies. Right. So seed and A stage companies. And how can we open up independent board seats at an earlier stage and draw upon these great resources that onboarding women have surfaced and place some of these women on our boards, which we've done successfully now several times. And so how can we get that diversity started earlier in the company's life cycle?
That's super interesting. I mean, this issue of networks, we know, again, to your point, we run into it at every stage of the problem, where even like moving from into your first job or moving from your first job to manager job, if you don't have those informal, should we call them networks? I mean, informal, formal networks, but figuring out how we're going to rebuild those, I think is amazing. I mean, frankly, Hope, you being here is a great example of how you are investing in rebuilding the network, because we met through you really reaching out and spending your time here, and Hope is an amazing Armoire customer and has been a supporter of me personally as well as our business, and so I really think that you're living that mission, and so I very much appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah, I loved the service of Armoire. It's something that has been a solution for me. So I am not someone that thinks about clothes. It's not something I'm good at.
Wouldn't guess it today.
Well, because I have found my solution. But more importantly, I tend to go on these cyclical cycles where I go to my board meetings and I have no idea what I wore the last time. I love the solution of Armoire because I hate a cluttered closet. I don't like to have a lot of clothes, but I also don't want to wear the same thing to my meetings over and over again. So this way, you rent the clothes. I can then turn them back in. I know I don't have the same thing I had in my closet last time I had this meeting, and I can be guaranteed that I'm going to wear something that is fashion forward and no one's seen before. So for me, it's the perfect solution. I really, really hate a cluttered closet. And so I hate buying new stuff and feeling like my old stuff is passé and I have to get rid of it. So this is the perfect mix for me.
That's amazing. Well, thank you.
Yes.
And thank you so much for spending time out of your busy day with us.
Oh, love it.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.